We're very excited to kick off VIFF Industry Exchange. I think it's a great testament to the strength of art. Yay, is it done?
Yes.
Oh my God. I was just not paying attention. Obviously it's a great testament to the strength of our local industry that you're all here today. The purpose of today is really to focus on business development opportunities for local industry professionals in the digital space. I'd like to thank Brian Seth Hurst, the founder and chief storyteller of Storytech Immersive, as well as Caitlin Burns, who works with Brian, and Arena
Cronin.
Yes, perfect. They've been the team, but the team behind putting together VIFF Industry Exchange, as well as VR Day tomorrow. Just a couple of words about Brian. With innovation in his DNA, it is no surprise that Brian Seth Hurst would emerge as a leading innovator, thought leader, and producer in the burgeoning field of virtual reality and immersive storytelling. Under his leadership, Storytech Immersive works with television networks, production companies, brands, and content creators to educate, strategize, package for, produce, and distribute high-quality virtual reality. The company's model includes embedding high-caliber independent VR filmmakers in existing production teams in television and film, thereby rapidly onboarding capabilities. I love that. You guys sound really fancy.
Yeah,
Yes.
get it done.
So I'd like to invite Brian up. He's going to set up the day for us, and then we'll get the show started. Brian.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We are very honored, Caitlin, Arena, and myself, to be able to partner with you on both these days. Normally we're out in the field producing, but because we love producers and we love things that push the edge, we're happy to partner with you on this. So we do have a great day today. I'm just going to go through the program really quickly. Disruption is the name of the game for those of you who are content creators or even executives or even consumers of content. You know the market is constantly changing. It's not just changing from a distribution point of view or a commissioning point of view, it's changing from a technology point of view. So we hope to have covered all of that today. So we're going to start out with Damon Berger from Fullscreen, who will give you a keynote about the changing international Telescape. That's going to be followed by Anatomy of a Digital Hit. I don't know if you're all familiar with YouTube Red, which is the subscription service. One of their number one shows, or has been their number one show, Escape the Night. We're going to have a 22-minute episode, and then we're going to talk to the creators and producers of Escape the Night. That's going to be followed by Minister Jolie's speech. And who knows, maybe there'll be a surprise or two in there. We are big fans of Creative Canada. So after that, we have You Say You Want a Revolution, which Caitlin will be moderating, and that's all about the disruption in television. We have John Roberts, who is very experienced in digital, along with Alma Derricks from the El Rey Network, and Steve Wolf, who's head of programming at Go90. So that should be a lively discussion to give you insights into the changes happening. Then we're going to have lunch, I believe. Oh no, we lunched before Minister Jolie. After that, we have a fireside chat with brands as media companies. I'm sure you're all aware, companies like Red Bull are not just selling soft drink anymore, they're creating content, and it's a media company as another source of great content in the world. We're going to be speaking with Joe Stoffel of Madison and Vine, who is actually an expert on brands as a media company and branded content. Then something special, Demand Your Independence, with lawyer Brian Sullivan, who's going to talk about what kind of deals you can make for yourself as independent filmmakers and independent digital content makers. Then we're going to have Catalina Brusino from the Canadian Media Fund, who's going to give us an update on the trends in the Canadian media right now. And then finally, Larry Cutler from Baobab Studios, who will jump in and give us an introduction into tomorrow's day. He's from very, very award-winning animation studio in VR. He's going to give us an introduction for tomorrow's day in VR. Meanwhile, on your breaks and when you have a chance out in the lobby area, we have some great VR for you. We have Raising a Ruckus from the virtual reality company. We have Oil in Our Creeks and I Am Rohingya from Contrast VR. I Am Rohingya, Rohingya, very much Rohingya people are in the news. This piece is a premiere prepared especially for VIFF. And then we have Bear 71 from the National Film Board of Canada. If you haven't seen that, be prepared. It made me cry. And then we have great performers, L.A. Noire from the New York Times. So there's lots to look at and lots to see. If perchance you have a Vive at home, or you know someone who has a Vive, we have a special section dedicated to the Vancouver International Film Festival where you can find this content and more on your Vive that is specific to VIFF. Thank you for being here today. Who am I? Back to Catherine.
Just quick thank you to the sponsors who made today possible. The Canadian Media Producers Association is our presenting sponsor for today's program. Creative BC, we received support from, as well as the Canada. I should do that with Minister Jolie this afternoon, right? Canada? Yeah. The Canada Media Fund, Western Economic Development, Telefilm, as well as Delta Airlines, who I believe brought all of our special guests here today. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Liz Shorten, the Senior Vice President of the Canada Media Producers Association, up here to introduce our keynote. Liz.
Good morning, everyone. We're pleased at the CMPA to partner with VIFF on what is now our third VIFF Industry Exchange, and exciting lineup for today. And I'm really honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Damon Berger. Damon's been with us in other events in Vancouver and has always been really informative, so I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. The focus of the keynote today is the changing international telescape. The traditional, the digital, and the upstarts vie for content and eyeballs. A little bit about Damon. He's VP of Global Strategic Partnerships for Fullscreen. Fullscreen Media is a global leader in the category of social entertainment and is the place where brands, creators, and fans join forces. In collaboration with the world's leading talent and brands, their model for content nurtures and elevates creators while serving as a full-service agency building fandom. Their network, their technology, and their services have changed the way content is produced, distributed, and consumed by more than 600 million subscribers around the world. The company is also a co-creator of YouTube's partner program. It's my pleasure to introduce Damon Berger.
Good morning. Has everybody had their coffee? We ready to do this? All right. Thank you. What?
You have my coffee there.
Oh. Thought I had an echo again. Did you really bring a mug?
Totally.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Very environmentally conscious.
JRFM.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again at VIFF. Vancouver really is an integral part of the global entertainment ecosystem, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. I think, as Brian was saying a minute ago, one of the themes in what I'm going to be talking about is kind of this idea of disruption and the entertainment industry. So the entertainment industry is really kind of easily broken down into three things. One is technology, the second is consumer adoption, and the third is disruption of that cycle. So I thought it would be fun, since we're at a film festival, to have a little bit of a trip back in time, to talk about where we came from, to understand where it is we're actually going. So I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are familiar with the Lumiere Brothers. So we're going all the way back to 1895, where the very first film technology was developed. It was Lumiere and Edison, the Lumiere Brothers and Edison kind of side by side. Things like frame rates and the persistence of vision and the idea around projection and film stock. Those are all technologies that were needing to be developed in order to get to what we know as cinema. And so the very first, or one of the very first public exhibitions of film is the arrival of a train back in 1895. And so, as you see here, it's pretty basic. There were only so many seconds that they could shoot at a time, given the film stock of the era. But I think what's interesting about this piece is that the consumer reaction to this, the way that the urban legend goes, was, as you'll see the front-on shot of the train in a second, the wives' tale of this was that the audience went running for the exits because they thought a train was coming through the screen and was going to crush them. And so we start seeing the first technology and consumer adoption of what we would then know as our entertainment industry. The next step in this was mass adoption, as we know, what we know as now the silent film era. Our first stars, Chaplin, the Marx Brothers, Buster Keaton, all of those stars were really kind of this mass adoption, like I said, of what we know as movies today. And so what's interesting about this is our next technological disruption was sound. And so in 1927, The Jazz Singer came out, which was the first movie that actually had a soundtrack to it. Prior to that, people would, you'd have a piano accompanying what was a silent film.
And poor Jabina Ralston and her lisp didn't actually survive the transition to sound film. She was one of the casualties of that disruption. And so as we move forward, up to 1960, so from 1945 to 1960, that's kind of considered the golden era of cinema. As we'll see in a second, there was a massive disruption that happens in 1945-ish that takes about 15 years to be adopted, as we know, as television. And so what we'll see here is, and I apologize, I have a bit of a US lens on a lot of what we're going to talk about. Apologies to my friends at the CBC and Rogers and Bell and the rest. I grew up in the States, so this is what I know. And so what we see here is in 1945, around 80% of the US population went to one movie a week. By 1960, that percent had dropped to 20. So as you can see, disruption immediately interrupts what that adoption was from the consumer side. And in that disruption, I think this is interesting to see. So in the US in 1960, the number one show on television was Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke, everybody, I'm sure if you're television nerds like me, know exactly what Gunsmoke was. If not, you could probably look it up on Netflix. And so what's interesting to see here is there were only 3 networks. And if you remember a time where prior to what I'll discuss in terms of disruption, this is linear television that is aired once. So if you know about ratings points are essentially a percentage of the available television sets in a certain area that are dedicated to that program. So 37% of all televisions in the United States were tuned into Gunsmoke on one airing. There wasn't a rerun, there wasn't another airing. If you missed it at 7, it didn't come on at 10. This is it. So what's interesting to see here is that one of the top rated new shows of the last season was This Is Us, ran on NBC, and it got a 4.8 rating. So you can see a bit of a difference between those as we move forward, right? So one of the things to think about too is in 1960, cable was a technology that allowed people in densely populated urban areas to receive a signal, because obviously with broadcast signals there's interference, and what cable was as a technology was allowed people to, in those areas, to actually see television. And it wasn't until 1972 that we got our first programmed cable network. A conglomerate went and said, we can license movies and program them on a linear channel for people at home. It's called home box office, HBO. And so what we see here is from 1984, which is kind of the start of the mass adoption of technology in cable, all the way through 2009, cable eats television. And you can, this traditional idea of the broadcast networks, the network television, you can see a pretty steep decline in the overall viewership of network television because cable came in and disrupted that idea. And HBO, as the example, I'll talk about a few times in this because it is one of our oldest examples and one of the more transformative examples of a company that started as one thing and became another thing and really adapted as the time goes on. And speaking of HBO, in 1990, so it started in 1972, and it took it until 1990 to actually enter in the original programming phase. And so what I want to talk about here is, this is their first example of scripted comedy on HBO. 1990, a show called Dream On. And so I'm just going to play a quick little clip.
First on Dream On, everything okay at the doctor?
Oh, it was nothing. He just had some finishing touches on his new penis.
You have a new penis?
You pump it up like a football.
Sounds like a very big success.
Okay. So as you can see, 1990, this is the first scripted show on HBO called Dream On. It's kind of evolved a lot from there to this in 2011. So it took, you could argue 1999 with The Sopranos was the first real premium scripted show on cable. And you can see it takes a long time. These cycles of disruption take a long time back in these periods. So we had 15, 20-year cycles between the advent of silent movies, to the advent of sound, to the advent of television. So these are pretty long cycles, including cable, which was itself, 1972 to call it 1984-ish plus, to 2009, where I showed you on that chart. And so what I think is really interesting to note here is that over the last 5 years, this is the change in overall viewership, not just broadcast, not just cable, overall viewership on television. So you can see something has happened here that is adversely affecting. So this is a new disruption that's happened, and we're seeing this adverse reaction to our industry. Before I get into why, I'm going to talk about a couple of things here that I think are important to think about. One, consumers didn't have a choice in the old models in traditional television, and when I say traditional, that means cable and broadcast. So we're talking about a world in which programmers really only cared about a couple of things. One, were you watching when they wanted you to watch, not when you wanted to watch? Were you watching, two, the commercials in and around the programming? And three, were they able to derive additional ancillary revenue from that programming in syndication and reruns and the rest? This is what the traditional television business is built on. None of that had anything to do with what the consumer wants, which I think is a really interesting moment in time to think about, because everything else to that point had been driven top down from our industry to our consumers. It really wasn't about what we wanted as consumers. So as we move forward, this will be the interactive portion of our talk until we get to the Q&A. Does anybody know what this number represents? Any guesses? Anybody? Don't be shy. It's okay. No wrong answer, except there's the one that is actually wrong.
Hours of television?
No.
Number of linear channels available in the U.S.?
No, but that's actually closer to 1,300. Anybody else? Yes.
Number of scripted TV types of shows?
No. So this one's a curveball a little bit.
Donald Trump's IQ he thinks he has?
Jeez, right? All right, we're not going that right. Like, we could spend the whole rest of this thing on how much I hate him, so we're not going to do that. What this is the number of times the average person touches their cell phone in a given day. So, flashback 10 years ago. There was no iPhone. We all had Motorola Razors that were kind of like that cool flip phone that, maybe was a little bit like a burner drug dealer phone. And so what's interesting about the advent of this technology is that with mobile, and particularly with high-speed broadband, this is a disruption that has a couple of things that are really different from what we've seen before. One, the mass adoption of this technology was faster than anything we've seen prior to it. And two, the availability of this technology has allowed for an ecosystem to explode. That includes customer choice, includes what people want to watch when they want to watch it. And so I think what's interesting about this is this explosion has led to a new ecosystem. So if we think about in our mind's eye, even from a US lens, ABC, CBS, and NBC being the only three networks. Now we have this, which, if you think about it, we have three kind of distinct categories here. The first is this idea of SVOD, so subscription video on demand services. The other is pay TV, and the third over in the corner is our AVOD, or advertising video on demand. So to break it down, these are the Netflix, Hulu's, and Amazons of the world. The pay TV is the CBS, NBC's, Disney's, Fox's of the world. And then in the corner are advertising supported businesses are YouTube and Snapchat and Facebook. And what's interesting about in an environment where we have infinite content, we also have I'm going to take a little longer because I was on at 10:15. So we're going to do this and we'll get through this. So the thing is that we're going to go, if we look at this ecosystem, in an infinite consumer choice, one of the things that happens in that is that the premium of content has to be that much better to stand out for consumer choice, right? Which is great for us as consumers. TV has never been better if you think about all of the things that we get to watch on a daily basis. But as an industry, this is very, very difficult to see. So if you think about it like this, right? I don't know why I chose this quote. It's impossible to read. So the idea of this is from the HBO chief that in his perspective as the HBO CEO, we have an infinite amount of content, which makes the margin for error that much smaller. And with all of the new players in the space, we see there's a proliferation of quality content, and we're trying to figure out what that means for our businesses. So right now, it's pretty obvious that because of this proliferation, we're in a bit of a bubble. So if you think about what every one of these companies up here, and by the way, not pictured is Amazon, who's spending $7 billion or $6 billion on content in 2017, or Apple, which is about to spend $1 billion on content. So if you see what's happening in all of these things, we're in an arms race for content. Bigger, better shows. I mean, Roy Price came out the other day, or Jeff Bezos said, a mandate to his team was go find me Game of Thrones times 10. So we're in this bubble of content spending to try to outrace each one of these individual companies, right? But that bubble is going to burst. And what's going to happen is we're going to enter a phase of consolidation over the next 5 years. We're already starting to see it happen with Verizon buying AOL and buying Yahoo and all these tech companies that are actually starting to position themselves as content companies. See it with AT&T and about to buy Time Warner. So there's a real consolidation phase that we're entering here, which is going to limit consumer choice in some ways, which is going to limit the subscription services that we're going to have. But to be honest, as consumers, we're not going to actually pay for that many services. So consolidation is actually a pretty good thing here for an overall consumer choice. But one of the things that's really hard about that consolidation phase is this. If you think about the way that, again, we've entered and left these different phases of technology, consumer adoption, and disruption, one of the things that I think is going to really be a very big piece of this is that in the consolidation phase, most of these companies have never really thought about the consumer and what the consumer wants, which I think as programmers, as producers, as filmmakers, this is a huge issue. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about this, and I read this, came out yet last week in the Hollywood Reporter. Just want to get this, kind of right. So Viacom, the parent company of MTV, Comedy Central, BET, and the Paramount Film Studio, is down 19% year over year. While the NASDAQ and Dow Jones hit highs and are on average about 13% year over year up, companies like Viacom, companies like Disney down 5% aren't actually riding this bubble because most of the analysts who are out in Wall Street think that these companies aren't actually investing in digital and where the consumer actually wants to go. So this is a huge gap in what we can try to figure out as programmers and the rest in terms of really exploiting that. So it's not all doom and gloom though. So one of the things that I think I want to impart as we're talking about the last 5 minutes, and I want to get into Q&A. The great thing for programmers and for filmmakers and for producers is that if you're entering a world in which creative choices have never been more important, and the boldness that you are able to instill upon those choices is what's going to make you win in this marketplace. So if you think about what the most popular shows are today, like a Stranger Things or a Rick and Morty, or on and on, these decisions, Black Mirror, are really bold creatively. These are things that wouldn't have been on television. Even something like Stranger Things was passed on by all 25 or 30 of the outlets that they actually took that show out to. And now it's one of the biggest shows on television, and season 2 coming out in October will be that much bigger. So one of the things that I really want to kind of impress upon, because of this crowded market, you have to make these choices in order to stand out. So that's the first. The second is spotting the white space. So this idea that we're kind of locked into mass thinking as programmers, trying to get the biggest audience possible. It's not always about getting the biggest audience possible. So a show like Transparent is a great example of that. What we're doing at Fullscreen with our SVOD services and trying to get a mobile-first, never-connected crowd engaged with new programming, really it's about 16 to 24-ish females. That's a huge gap of people that have never really subscribed to television, have never really been a part of this traditional ecosystem. So it's about trying to figure out what isn't out there and spotting that white space and really exploiting it. And lastly, it's about innovating. So if we think about this idea of technology, then consumer adoption, then disruption, if you disrupt, you're the one who's going to be first in that curve in the next cycle. So a few things that I want to kind of talk about in this slide are formats. So we've been talking about 22s and 44s for probably 50 years at this point, and we're ripe for a new way of looking at formats. So are they interactive? Are they in VR? Are they things that aren't necessarily subject to the length of what we're normally used to as producers and programmers? Marketing. And again, in an infinite universe of content with infinite consumer choice, how are you standing out? And are you making those decisions in the pre-production and development phases in order to do so? So it's not necessarily just about the creative choices you're making. What are the stars that you're putting in this? Are you putting influencers that have, X amount of millions of subscribers in your programming? The next is mobile short form. So Jeffrey Katzenberg has just started a company called WonderCo that's going out and raising something like, $6 billion in capital to be able to tackle the mobile short form space. So if we think about in our own daily lives, Facebook, YouTube, etc., we're consuming more mobile short form content by the day in something like 100 years are uploaded every day alone on YouTube. So are you using mobile short form in a way that can maybe even disrupt your next thing, pilot process? So we've been looking at things like Netflix, which are taking a pilot process and just greenlighting an entire series. What I think is interesting here is, what is your pilot process? How are you going about something that has been traditionally very stagnant in its innovation? And then the last one is data, and I think data is almost most important and the most daunting. What do you know about your audiences that you're trying to reach with your programming? What do you know about the things like artificial intelligence that can help you with understanding your audiences or your programming? So, not to get too dystopian on this, there's a University of California Davis professor who's been feeding a machine learning algorithm with Chopin and Mozart with the hope of that algorithm learning how to write symphonies. And it's actually been working to like a really dystopian level where that algorithm is pumping out 5,000 symphonies a day. So to think about how we look at our next evolution, this to me is where some version of the combination of these things is where we're going to have to go as an industry in order to get ahead of this next curve, which is going to be, I think, the biggest evolution of all. But at the end of the day, it really matters what you're putting here. Most of all, the storytelling, the things that we know as professional commissioners and producers, that's going to win. So that's the end. Thank you again for having me. I'll take some questions if you guys want.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Damon, for being with us today. In the interest of keeping everything on schedule, we're going to have to ask you all to catch Damon with questions out in the concession area after the panel.
Sure. I'm actually heading back, so if you want, damon@fullscreen.com, just hit me up with an email.
Thank you so much, Damon.
Thank you, guys.
A round of applause again. Burns, and I'm just going to segue us right into our next session this morning to get you all out on time for lunch. So I'd like to invite to the stage with me the panelists for our next panel, Content with a Cause. We have Paula Elias from Storia, Marie Clements, fantastic documentarian and filmmaker, and Steve Talbot of ITBS, a different selection of tools you can use to get your message out and to engage people directly. So what I'd like to do is start us off by having each of you introduce yourselves, and we've got some pieces to show in complement to your introduction. So Paula, Why don't you start off?
Okay. I'm Paula Elias, and I work with Story Up, and we are housed in a studio in the center of the United States in Columbia, Missouri. Our roots actually go back to working with veterans. Our founder began working with veterans who were terminally ill, and she was part of the Honor Everywhere flight, which was a program that brought veterans to see their memorial in Washington, D.C. These terminally ill and elder veterans couldn't do that. So we started brainstorming of how we could bring these veterans to actually see their memorial, and came up with VR. And so we created an experience that was of the memorial in Washington, and then we would take it out to veterans' homes and put the headsets on these people and give them a chance to visit their memorial. And this is when we really kind of viscerally understood the power of transporting somebody through virtual reality. They'd take off the headsets and they'd be wet because they'd be crying. And it was really powerful to see that. So we've done a project about the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., and then we are just completing one on the Women's Memorial, and you can see all that on the Story Up app.
Now you brought a different piece with you today to talk. Do you want to show that, or do you want to key it up before we show it?
Yeah, I can show it real quick.
Sure.
It's actually, we do two different things at Story Up. One is kind of nonprofit branded content. We do it for actual brands. We also do it for causes like this one was for the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation and Empowered by Light. And it's about energy poverty in the Congo and in Brazil. We also have created a product that we call the Story Up Spa, and it uses the brain-computer interface. It's kind of like a happiness video game. It's so you can train your brain, and we're working with the Neuro Meditation Institute to see what kind of effects this has, and I think we have a slide on that.
Yeah.
But it's basically where you can use a happiness video game to train your brain to be positive using the brain-computer interface. We're using the Muse right now, and I can talk about that more in detail later if you're interested.
Yeah. So let's show those videos now.
There are people in the world who are giving their lives to save the earth.
I lost two of my colleagues in March. The other challenge we faced.
So you all can find Are You Listening by going where?
You can go to our Story Up app. You can also, it's on Vimeo.
Let's pause it. Yeah.
I think they were trying, just from a quality standpoint, it wasn't buffering, it was buffering or something.
Yeah. So going to the Story Up app, and this was a piece for the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, correct?
Right, and basically what we did is we went and we lived with the Munduruku tribe in Brazil for a week. And they are people who've lived there for 15,000 years, and the Brazilian government was building a dam to flood out their ancestral lands. And so we went to just really try to tell their story and get it out. That project premiered at the Dubai International Film Festival and then went on to Cannes and played there, and got a lot of play through the app, and really just trying to get people to pay attention. They did win the fight, and so their lands are protected. And then we also did the project connected with it about the park rangers that are fighting to save the mountain gorillas.
Fantastic. Let's bring up that second frame just to give some context for this the VR spa.
Yeah, so this is it. And this is, we're working on, like I said, with the Neuro Meditation Institute, and this is just something that shows you before VR and after VR what's going on in your brain and the movement. And so you can see, the less red the better, just in.
What does red mean?
The red is actually, and I'm not the scientist by any means, but the red is actually the brain waves that are associated with stress in your brain. And so there are less of them from the VR meditation experience. So that's actually using our Story Up experience that is calming.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. Marie, tell us a little bit about what you brought to show the audience today.
I think it's really long now that I think about it, but It's just a clip from my feature music doc called The Road Forward, combining BC and Canada's history with a newspaper that was formed in 1930s called The Native Voice, combining that with music to tell the story.
Fantastic. Yeah. So let's bring up Marie's video now.
Sorry it's long, guys. I've got it.
About and how you found your way to this really engaging style of telling the story.
Well, I discovered, actually I'd never heard it before, but it was a newspaper based in Vancouver that was formed by Native activists back in the 30s and formed by members of what was called the Native Brotherhood and Sisterhood of BC. And so they formed this newspaper that had news stringers from all over the Americas, mailing in their stories and kind of unifying a voice and bringing voice to, across the country into this one newspaper where everybody could know what's going on politically, what's happening with different rights in different parts of the country.
And tell us, where can people find this piece now?
There's a screening this afternoon, but it's at BC Hydro, and we're the closing film at the Imaginative Film Festival, coming up here mid-October, and also the Margaret Mead Festival in New York mid-October, and San Francisco. I know somebody's from San Francisco, at the American Indian Film Festival coming up.
If this clip is any indication of what the rest of the film is like, I cannot wait to check it out. And I could probably watch another 5 or 6 hours of it. So,
Okay, good. That's a good sign. Thanks.
yeah. So let's move on to you, Steve, for now. Tell us a little bit about your work at ITVS and some projects that have been really exciting for you.
Sure. For those of you who don't know ITVS, we have been around for 25 plus years. In the wacky way that public television is funded in the United States, we get a guaranteed tiny sliver of funding every time Congress votes money, which they sometimes don't want to do, including this last time, but they did. They fund public radio and public TV. They give the money to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and we, a group of independent filmmakers, lobbied years ago to make sure that a small sliver of that money goes to independent filmmakers. And then to set up a system to give that money out, ITVS was created. And ITVS is, they're at the News and Documentary Emmys in New York tonight with, I think, 15 nominated documentaries. We put about 25 documentaries on the air in our series Independent Lens, which is Monday nights at 10 in PBS. We also fund films that end up on the series POV, and some of the other shows like Frontline, which is where I spent most of my career producing documentaries, the TV series. So Independent Lens, in ITVS, the thing that sets us apart is that not only are we funding independent documentary filmmakers, but there's a very high priority on diversity, racial diversity in particular, women, and giving voice to people who don't normally have voices, frankly. Very strong Native American film that ran last year that was called What Was Ours, about Native Americans in the United States trying to recover artifacts, sacred artifacts that have been taken off land of theirs. Some big films. Raoul Peck, who's in the Vancouver Film Festival with a film, dramatic film this time. He did a documentary about James Baldwin, the writer, which is called I Am Not Your Negro. It's an extraordinary documentary. It's amazingly made over $8 million last time I checked in a theatrical release. It came out in the summer. Our films tend to get funded by us, appear in a film festival first, several film festivals. If they're lucky, get a distribution deal, and then they end up on TV where they still have their largest audience by far. Because despite all the disruptions that we just heard about, network TV or PBS is still have very high ratings for documentaries. Millions of people see these films on TV. So that TV, Raoul Peck's film, will air, I think, in February. So that's what we do, and the particular thing that I'm doing now, as basically a person who always made documentaries for TV, is to help these filmmakers make shorter versions of what they're doing. Because we obviously are finding that people do want to watch things on their phones and do want to watch YouTube and Facebook and so forth. And even though my heart is in long-form documentary production, I also think there's real value in shorter versions. And not just clips or promos, which are important teases, but actual stories that are sometimes offshoots of the films, sometimes are edited excerpts from the films, but that always tell a coherent story with a strong narrative and a focus on character. So all the qualities that make the documentary strong in miniature. And what we do is we distribute those to journalistic outlets. So we have a very good website, which has many of these films are on, and go check them out. It's pbs.org/independent lens. But we actually are giving these to all sorts of outlets, kind of unusual, but the Atlantic Magazine, its website, USA Today, People Magazine, and then some blogs and digital native sites, Civil Eats, and so forth. And we're having a lot of success with pieces that range from, say, 5 to 10 minutes. And, we're talking about millions of views on Facebook for a story we just did on USA Today about an undocumented kid in Salinas, California from a farm worker family. There was an hour documentary made about him 2 years ago. We followed his story. He's a very bright, promising kid from a farm worker family, but he was born in Mexico, raised in the United States, could face deportation under the new Trump, what Trump's pushing for. We'll see. So those pieces we've distributed to a variety of sources, journalistic outlets. They want this content because newspapers and magazines are moving in more and more into video. And we also put a lot of these stories on the PBS NewsHour, which is still the nightly news show in the States.
So what you bring up is a really interesting tension between the creative work of these really purpose-based pieces and some of the immediate reasons why you might be making them in the first place in terms of getting out messages or getting people to engage with a topic that they haven't thought of before. How does that work for you, Marie? Have you given thought to the way that you want to expand the reach of your piece to the audience first versus inserting in markets where you might be able to find a partner like an ITVS or a larger distribution group that can help you hit those very large numbers of audiences through TV or film? What does it mean to be in an environment where you might be able to catalyze a different kind of attention by going out to social media or digital outlets?
Well, I think I was lucky to partner to have the National Film Board be on board with this project, and because it's kind of bridging our shared history, but also music. Some of our leading Aboriginal rock stars, really, in Canada are in the piece, and also looking at the leading activists for the last 60 years. So I think these kind of streams came together to. It has had a great ability to reach people because of, I think, just the diversity of that. But it's, to be honest, I have a huge background in theater. So anytime people are sitting in front of a screen, I go, oh my God, they're sitting in front of a screen and this can go on, across the country, and hundreds of people or thousands of people can see it, and the word of mouth on that. But it is something that I realize, I was thinking about this panel and going, well, I don't really, watch mainstream news anymore. A lot of the reports I get, or a lot of the way I receive information is, sadly, sometimes through Facebook, but it's also a grassroots movement, and we're seeing the front lines through activists, point of view. And I think that's why I find it's really dynamic in the sense that you're able to receive information that has a perspective rather than a corporate idea of the world, that we're having to consume.
Paula, you told us a little bit about how you made your way to your VR pieces for the memorial work with veterans. Do you go through the same process with the clients that are coming to you, like the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation? Are they coming to you specifically for VR or study work?
Yeah, so most of the work that I do is connecting with people who are looking for VR projects that are social good projects. So I think we do most of that. When you talk about distribution, it's really interesting from our perspective because we release through social media, we release through apps, and then it's really individual, putting a headset on people's heads. So it's such an interesting thing. It's like I come from a 2D fixed frame filmmaking background, and we recently did a project about what was happening in North Dakota with DAPL and all of that, and only released it on Facebook, actually. That was the only place that it has played to date. And so I think just my mind has completely shifted from a distribution standpoint, and then you think about lengths when you talk about long format and short format. It's a short format world now, and I think I love long format too, but like we sat through a 2-hour movie last night, and my son and I was kind of like, that was a long time.
Yeah, and for you at ITVS, you have a lot of pieces that come to you as films to start. Do you ever have pieces that are coming to you from other formats that are looking at how they could connect to the work you're doing, or want to look at longer form but have started with that short form mentality?
Not really, although this is all changing, as we know. It's a rapidly transforming world. I mean, there's a very traditional process that has been in place at ITBS for years, where twice a year they have a system called Open Call. And if you are a documentary filmmaker or have a video project and you want to apply, you apply. There's a very transparent screening and panel system to evaluate it. And then there's money, substantial money, that's given to films, $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 sometimes. And then those filmmakers work with the organization as a co-producer to develop that film over time. And sometimes that film happens very fast. I mean, I'm an old journalist, so I'm used to working very fast. ITBS moves slow by my standards, having been at Frontline for so long. But a film could happen in a year. It could take years. This I'm Not Your Negro, no one would support that Raoul Peck film. ITBS gave it very important seed money, shepherded it all the way. I think that took a decade. Obviously, he did other projects in between to stay alive, including the film that he has in the festival now. But that's how long the process can take. Now, we are considering lots of other initiatives which would develop stories faster and develop things specifically for internet distribution.
Very, very cool. So I want to open it up to the audience. If you have questions for our panelists, please, this would be a great moment for you to start this conversation. I can keep asking questions forever as well, but I do want to invite you all to join in if you have any questions for anyone up here. Yes, you, sir.
I had a question for Paula. With the VR, the brain scans, that seems to mirror like higher states of meditation. Is that what's going on, sort of? Is it?
Hang on for a second. I'll just repeat so everyone can hear. The question is for Paula, and it's the meditation seems to mirror some of the higher states of meditation research. And wanted to know the connection on that.
What he's referring to is the brain-computer interface project, the Story Up Spa. Is what we call it. We don't know for sure what it's doing. That's why we partnered with Dr. Tarrant at the Neuromeditation Institute. Experientially, I'm going to do a lot of meditation. I think it does. And I think it's really interesting. We were talking earlier about being entrepreneurs and how you have to find that place in your brain that's positive no matter what's happening. You just had 3 projects killed and you're not sure how you're going to, feed yourself for the next month. And you're like, everything's great. You have to figure out how to stay up here. And that's what this experience is like. I mean, it feels like a muscle in your brain that you're exercising to figure out how to stay up, and you learn what that's like. Now, whether or not we can back that up with research yet, we still have studies that are pending.
Can I follow up with that?
Sure.
So like, is that sort of like, I don't want to get too philosophical. Okay. Is it sort of like Aristotle's virtue ethics, like where you're like basically using your mind as a muscle to build an ethical kind of system through this interface?
Right. So everything I say is not backed up by research.
Yes.
So that's been my experience, and I'm very hopeful that this can be used in all sorts of applications for people who are, from a sales team standpoint, just in a real raw kind of a standpoint, to people who are in hospitals, children in hospitals who are, terminally ill or dealing with, some really tough stuff. And I think the application of this kind of a product is vast and amazing, and I can't wait for the research. But I have, actually I don't have that piece with me, but you can go to the Story Up app and you can download it, and if you have a Muse headband, you can use it as well. So.
I think it's really interesting looking at the ways that people working in VR are studying the impact of their experiences on people. But for me, the most interesting part is how we're learning that simulation and experience affects people and what that means for traditional experiences as well. So I wanted to dive deeper with you into the choice to use music in your piece, Marie. For me, I also came out of theater, but I also know that a really upbeat musical piece does something to me as an audience member. And I wanted to just get your thoughts on why these choices, why this type of experience for this topic.
Well, I think our history in Canada is sometimes people don't want to consume it anymore. They want to keep to what they thought. Part of it was to look at how a newspaper, how we experience a newspaper, how we experience headlines, and how we imagine what those stories are when we read those headlines. So it became, in some ways, integral looking at these activists who brought their voices from the communities to this newspaper, and how a lot of modern contemporary artists are bringing music to create change through writing lyrics that become songs, that become kind of open up into a larger world. So it was really looking at voice. How do we connect voice with movement? How do we raise our voice to create change? And it seemed, I don't know why it was obvious, but it seemed obvious to work in that way. And you know, I think also, as we know, you know, music is very universal, meaning even if you don't like the topic, even if you don't like the person singing it, you might fall in love with a few lines or the beat, and you all of a sudden are converted, you know? So part of it. Yeah.
Actually, Caitlin, just one thing on music, I'll follow up. For a while, a few years ago, I did some music specials for PBS. We called the show Soundtracks Music Without Borders. And we also had an online sidelight for it, which actually no one was coming to the PBS website, Art's website, for these videos, short videos, and we created a YouTube channel for them that did pretty well, and that led PBS to start its digital studios, which is its whole network. But we did not only music stories to inspire people, it was a magazine format show, an hour with 3 stories in an hour and a performance at the end from some group. But we also would use it to tell stories to people, to do investigations. So just one quick example, we did a story about Putin had a propaganda pop song that he used in all his campaigns early on. It was called I Want a Man Like Putin.
It's really catchy.
It's insanely catchy. And so I wanted to find out who wrote that song. How did that get created? Who sang it? How was it distributed? Was the Kremlin involved? And so forth, because it became a theme song to him to reach young people in particular. So I sent a crew to Moscow, and we investigated that, and we found the very cynical songwriter and his Kremlin associate that he created it with, and the 2 women who sang it, and traced how it was used in all the Putin campaigns. So sometimes music's wonderful and inspiring, and sometimes it's, you know, yuck, but you learn something by following the notes.
I actually watched that and was really fascinated by that piece. So we've got a question in the center of the audience over here. Let's go here and then up behind you.
Thank you for being here today. It's fantastic. I forgot your name on the left. So
Steve.
Steve, yes, question for Steve. Did you work with Bill Baker?
Don't know that name.
Oh, he was at PBS for a long time. Okay, what sort of revenue models, I know obviously you're a nonprofit, but how do you forecast viewership, and what kind of revenue models are you working at? Because obviously you've got a very disruptive distribution model now, so you've got to break out various different types of revenue.
I'll say, and I'm not the person, thank God, who handles the money for this thing. I'm the senior producer, so I worry about the editorial content and the creativity of the videos and not the business model. But I mean, really simply, it's an old-fashioned business model for us. As I said, our money comes from taxpayer money in the United States. It's allocated by Congress. It's what supports public radio and public television in the States. We get a sliver of that money and give it to independent filmmakers. There are co-production deals made with the filmmakers so that if a film happens to make, as some documentaries do, money in theatrical release, we get some of that back and plow that back into funding other filmmakers because we're a nonprofit. And in dealing in what I'm specifically doing right now with these shorts, distribution to journalistic models, we do get money back when something has ads on it and has a lot of views. But we really need, obviously the organization, people smarter than I am about business are looking into other business models.
Who's the narrator on Frontline? Love that guy.
Will Lyman, the voice of God. He's fabulous.
So the woman behind you. Yeah.
Hi, I have another question for Steve. As a person who was brought up by PBS, actually has nothing to do with PBS. How many pitches do you get for your open call? Like how many applications do you get on average? If you can say that, and what are you looking for?
That Frontline is that kind of investigative series. Independent Lens is really social issue and character-driven stories. Something that just, there's a film coming up called Unrest, and it's about a woman dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome that a lot of people have said, oh, maybe that's not a real thing, maybe it is. This woman, very serious woman, Harvard grad student, has it. It's her total personal story.
Thanks.
Sure.
So anyone on this side of the room, any questions, thoughts? I'm gonna stare in this direction for a second.
That side knows everything.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's great. Yeah, so feel free to throw up a hand. Yes, down here.
I realize this is about filmmaking,
Mhm.
but obviously you're choosing also how it's going to be viewed. And Marie, when you were talking about you were getting a lot of your news from Facebook, to some extent that's like, it's curated by your circle of friends. We're now starting to get interesting revelations about how Facebook was used by Russia, and you're thinking of things like Breitbart. Do you as filmmakers, and I don't know whether you can even answer this, have concerns then that if people are turning away from conventional news that has to apply a lot of balance and research before they put something out there, what does it say about the kind of consumption of news and our view on the world, knowing it can be manipulated by that small bubble that we choose only to click into?
Well, I mean, I get your point, and I think there is a danger in receiving news just from your Facebook feed, but I also feel for a lot of people that that never had a stake in how mainstream news is, that maybe there's only one perspective out there. I think as an Indigenous person, what's great about it for me, to have access to whether it's live streams or whether I have friends that are, yes, they're performers and filmmakers and actors, but they're also activists, and they're also at Standing Rock. And so, I don't have to see just, those bad Native people acting up on mainstream TV. I get to see what's actually really happening. And maybe, that's a point of view that I need to see, and that I think a lot of our history of news has, not to say that it's, totally bad, but it really does, it really does what? It can sometimes make people voiceless, and not have a participation or a stake in what's happening in our country, or in our country. And I think that's the danger on the other side, is that, it keeps us checks and balances, meaning we have to then, if everybody's watching one thing and we're getting news reports from somewhere else, we start to understand that what is the truth and whose truth is it, and that becomes a bigger dialogue, which I think is valuable.
Yeah, so back to what you're saying, I think I completely concur with what Maria's saying. During Standing Rock and the whole thing that was happening there, the only really viable news you could get was from Facebook and Twitter. I mean, there was nothing mainstream that you could get, and mainstream has always been biased, but we just acted like it wasn't. We always just said, oh yeah, it's the news, Walter Cronkite, right? And it's always been biased. I mean, every story we tell is biased. Every story we tell has an implicit bias. We can't help it because it's people telling the story. Maybe the algorithm, when it tells the story, we can program it not to have implicit bias. But so being aware of that, I think it's more about curating for ourselves. So curating our Facebook so that we get news that is from divergent opinions.
So
I actually have a different view on that. As a journalist, as a lifelong journalist, it's a pro and con thing. I mean, the fact that Facebook exists and other outlets is really important, because it's absolutely true. When you had only 3 networks, as good as the news they did or as bad as the news there were certain biases. It was an elite news and so forth. And people didn't get on the news. The advantage of it is that it was common ground, that people, and it was vetted. And what I do worry about are phony Russian Facebook ads. That's a problem. And I do worry about people being so siloed into their own specific group that they don't talk to each other, and that we don't have a common basis of facts that we can agree on to make decisions. And we're not always going to agree, that's for sure. And we want as many voices as possible in that common ground to be heard. But yeah, I don't worry about entertainment balkanizing, but I do worry about the news balkanizing. I think that's a problem. And it's got advantages, and it lets other voices out, but it's a problem that we're going to have to deal with as big societies.
Yeah, and sorry, we have to wrap up for now, but I want to thank you all for joining us today and for sharing your work, going deeper into big, personal, big questions that give other people and other periods and important issues.
So, I've got so many questions. First of all, where the hell is Colonel Mustard? Just kidding. I'm sure you've been asked that before.
He's in season 3.
He's in season 3. Excellent. I just want to ask, who was the escape room aficionado? Because it seems like there's a lot of escape room stuff in there.
Yeah, so when I was first conceiving the show, I knew I had YouTube influencers, and I knew I wanted to tell a narrative, and I wanted to kill people, which you don't usually get to do in reality TV. So
as much as you would like to.
As much as you would like to. And I think at the heart of what Joey wanted to do initially is was to have like a murder mystery experience. And so I think that the way I wanted to facilitate a world in which I didn't need to script my stars, but would script everyone else, was to build games that they could play, because it would facilitate much more interesting interactivity. And so for this season, in season 1, I designed 160 some odd clues per season. And I think, Ari and I early on did many escape rooms. I've produced a lot of gaming content.
Had you done escape rooms before you got on to this?
I'd done a couple, but with Adam, we had quite a bit of adventures.
Catherine, were you also hauled into the escape rooms?
I did one, but actually not with them, believe it or not. Yeah.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, because I think the fun of it was, is we didn't want to just have an escape room where they needed to solve a clue to get out the door, but that there was a narrative being told by what they were doing, and that it could take place real time. Because I think we had influencers in this. We didn't have actors, but we wanted to go to a fantasy place. So that was kind of my response to dealing with somebody who was a great reactor and had a great personality, and they were beautiful people, but didn't have acting skills.
Okay,
per
great.
se.
So let me get this for a second before we get into the production. So just to back up, Joey had a deal with YouTube Red to come up with some sort of show, right?
That's right. So the way that it worked, YouTube was like, we want to create a premium on-demand sort of subscription service, and they essentially had golden tickets, if you will. So there was like 10 of these, and Joey was one of them. And so YouTube was like, hey, Joey, what do you want to do? If you could do something that's really premium and elevated, what would it be? And he was like, I think I want to do a murder mystery. And no one really knew what that was. And so, long story short, Brian Green Media was pulled in, and when we took the meeting, we were like, there's only one person that could actually do this. We were like, Adam Lawson. And yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So let me see if I understand this right, because there are actors that you cast.
Yeah.
And there are reactors, which are the influencers.
That's right.
So basically, the influencers who are invited into the house,
Right.
they know nothing about what's going to happen to them.
That's right.
And they're willing to play that.
That's right.
Okay. And in terms of scripting something, you're chuckling. It's like, maybe they are, maybe they are. In terms of scripting, you're scripting the overall episode, and then then you've got to roll with whatever happens, right? It is kind of like Tamara and all these, like Sleep No More, and you're dealing with the audience, but you're actually producing these multiple episodes, and you still have to steer.
But when the reactors react in a certain way, does that affect what you write for the next episode, or?
No, so I mean, I write these like a traditional television episode, and when you look at the script, except instead of lots of dialogue scenes, it'll have the clues that I design, but all the other dialogue spoken by everybody else but the influencers is all written, and it's all rehearsed, and we rehearse the performance without the influencers. And then what happens is when we shoot the episode real time, and I have an earwig in all the other actors' ears, plus a story producer on the floor, so I can help influence the YouTubers as they're talking to go a direction, and then on the fly create dialogue to work with where they're going.
So you're actually feeding dialogue into the actors' ears while you're watching how the reactors are reacting.
That's right.
Holy crap. Is there anything else like this that exists? Because this seems like
not that I know of
because
exactly.
Damon Berger said today that you need to be bold. That was his like guidance. Pardon my back over here. I'm so sorry. That you need to be bold, and this is like super bold. And there's so many directions to go in. What the heck does it take to produce this? And I won't ask your budget because all the times I've been moderating panel, nobody ever tells me their budget. So I'm not even going to ask, what is your budget? No. But tell me what it's like to produce this. How does it work? How many episodes do you produce at one time? How fast is what's your timeline? How does it work?
Sure. We do about episodes run from between 22 25 minutes. We do 10 22-minute episodes roughly within our season arc. Then we do another 2 kind of additional content episodes. But to kind of
how many do you shoot at once?
Well, we shoot basically an 11-day schedule. So you saw a little bit at the opening of this. We shoot basically like a traditional single camera television show for about 5 nights. And then we go into, I guess, what I'd consider Hell Week, which is where we shoot 2 episodes a night for 5 nights straight, which is more of our once we're in the game scenario.
Oh my gosh. And in terms of editing, you're obviously going to have so much footage, and the editing is how you're ultimately going to tell the story. How long does that take?
Yeah, so we have a 15-day cycle for each episode on picture editing. So if you can imagine when we're in it, the episode takes place real time. There's not an additional take. They just live the show. I have 6 operators and that are on the floor with cinema cameras, and we're just moving it real time. And then we recraft the story. So actually, in truth be told, as far as unscripted TV, we have very little content because we only have 3 hours of 6 cameras versus maybe on a traditional show you have hundreds of hours. So, but we have a 15-day cycle to edit them, and so we rebuild all the conversations and clean them up and kind of arc their experience a little more than maybe happened real time.
So when you watch the influencers and you go, okay, so one of the influencers whose name escapes me right now that's with Joey, she's not scripted at all. She's just ad-libbing.
That's right. That's right. That's just Liza.
And is Joey scripted?
So Joey in this sequence, because Joey is, he's the creator, he knows the broad strokes of what's going to happen on the show. He doesn't have dialogue, but he knows broadly what will happen across the season, but he doesn't know the actual individual events, so he can act it versus having to pretend he doesn't know things. So in this moment, he and I discussed how much he should reveal, like how much does he know to tell Liza? And then he goes. And then as we're going throughout it, he and I touch base in between episodes, just because he's ahead of them, but he doesn't know how to solve the clues himself.
And what has the reaction been among the influencers themselves in terms of the experience? How are they with this? And are other influencers like gunning to get into the show?
They love it. I mean, we all have so much fun making the show. A lot of people reach out, like, how can I be on Escape the Night? But I think if you're thinking about cast and who are like, sort of like the perfect key players, Liza, Tyler, like all of them really wanted to be a part of the show. They saw season 1 and were like, oh my gosh, I want to be a part of this. And then others, they weren't familiar. They had to binge the first season to sort of get caught up. But, yeah, they're always emailing. I get emails every day. How can I get into this show? Yeah.
But they love it. I mean, they love the ride because for them, it's like they're in Westworld, right? Because for them, it's all real time. They just live the show. They don't actually have to pretend. When there's a monster, I give them a real monster. When the wall blows up, I just blow it up on them. And they live it. And so for them, they're kind of having the time of their life. And we shoot all through the night, so they're going crazy, and you can't imagine behind the scenes. So, so I think the ride is a total win, and Catherine does a pretty amazing job at pulling the right talent in.
Do they make suggestions?
They don't. They don't.
That's excellent.
No, for all of them, I give them a character, like the novelist or the thespian or the explorer, and then I'll say, hey, Liza, here's where I think your archetype lives. Because it's you're still Liza, but you're going to just skew yourself that way. So you don't have to act, you're not performing.
And you're also giving their influencers, I mean, the audience that is their community, you're not changing who they are. No. They're reacting in that community. And what has happened with them? Well, first of all, going back again, there's kind of you must have been a gamer as well, because there's a kind of gamer structure to this as well, especially where there's this convergence of story and game that has been happening for years. So you're kind of laying out the story first, like you would in Uncharted or This Is Us, any of those games, you're kind of laying out the story. We're in on it, we're watching it, we kind of know what happens. And then we watch live gamers actually playing in that game, correct?
That's right. I grew up on theater and Dungeons and Dragons, and this is kind of the realization of that, right? Where you're playing the show you're in. So yeah, so definitely there's so many game mechanics and game intention with it. In any sort of video role-playing game or real life or tabletop role-playing game, you encounter the NPCs, right? And those are the other actors. And so it was definitely built.
And the audience now, obviously, they're playing along. Is there any sort of interactivity on the part of the fans and the part of the audience? How do they play? How do they speculate what will happen in the next episode? What is their involvement, and how do you maintain pulling them in for each episode and expanding the audience?
Our fan base is amazing. I think this season when the trailer launched, or even the cast announcement launched, we had so many videos from fans just saying, oh my gosh, this is the order of how we think everyone's gonna die, and what ways they're gonna get killed off. The fan base is huge, and they love the show.
Is anybody making book on this, like in Las Vegas? Be it betting who dies next?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't.
But there is
I would never do
so
that.
much fan speculation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's fun because they build their own little videos. They retell parts of it, and Joey and I are quite close, and he gets 100 million emails about it from fans, and I think it's really quite fun. Like even little tiny teeny Easter eggs we drop, they get picked up, and there's a video about it. There's in season 1 we had 2 people die who were a part of the villains, and in this scene they have a conversation. They have to make a phone call to hell in this season in one of the episodes, and the people they talk to on the line are the actors from last season. And the only way you could know that is if you watched the credits, right? And sure enough, they watched the credits, they pieced it together.
This is just like the perfect marriage of game and reality, and it's just so beautifully done. Ari, what have you learned from season 1 to season 2? How have things changed? Because an executive producer, obviously you're managing budget and so many other things, but you learn as you go. You have to. So what is different?
Well, I just have to applaud our whole team. It really does take a whole village of us to...
Village of the damned, as it were.
Adam's a world builder.
That is perfect. That is
I mean, that's just what it is. And Joey is just so into fantasy. So as you can see in season 2, we have built this fantastical world. And in season 1, you kind of caught a snippet of it at the beginning. We were in sort of the 1920s, and now we kind of went in season 2 back to the Victorian era. So in season 1, we were, everything had to be in the 1920s. We had to build a 1920s world. We found a great location, which is key in terms of building your world. And we had to, even down to before we start shooting, we're hiding cables, we're hiding the crew, figuring out unique ways so that the YouTubers themselves stay in the world, just like you would when you enter an escape room, for anyone who's done escape rooms. So what we kind of picked up from season 1 was more efficient ways to, one, kind of put the YouTubers on a sort of more fantastical ride. and at the same time kind of streamline our production process in order to do that. When we were first getting into season 1, we had to kind of take a lot of crew members and key crew members who are maybe used to coming from scripted or unscripted and kind of really merge them together so that, you know, say for an AD using scripted is just kind of building single camera or kind of multi-camera kind of schedules, whereas, you know, on an escape room type of show like this, we're really working off of a cue sheet and multiple, you know, headsets going on. And it's just, it's a much more robust experience in terms of kind of just from the 80s job point. So coming back full circle on that, I think what we've kind of taken away is we've sort of assembled a really great team of professionals who have really been able to transcend both kind of the workflows of scripted and unscripted to be able to bring together what Joey and Adam's world is and the story they want to tell.
How do you think that this has influenced the, so this is really, you've created a brand new genre, at least in my mind, that has not really been done. You've taken the best of, and the best of, and the best of, and brilliantly combined it. How do you think, again, going back to our keynote speech today, how do you think this might influence content in the future? Because everybody was always talking about how to best use YouTube influencers. I can remember years ago I was working for a production company, and they were like, well, we're going to get all the YouTube influencers and we're going to make them act, right? You know, in other words, we'll put all the YouTube influencers into scripted stuff, which of course didn't work and didn't happen. But how do you think this, because there's a change here, influences programming in the future? Have you created a new genre? Are there imitators that are trying to follow up what you're doing?
I don't know if there's been imitators just yet, and hopefully there is at some point, but I know YouTube officially has announced that they announced it as a new genre, a surreality, as the new genre. And, you know, I think it's, I hope so. I think that that was my conceit of it from the beginning, was I knew I was going to have an all-influencer cast, and how could I create an arena for them to win versus one where I would show their weakness, right? Their weakness is they aren't trained actors. Their strength is they have incredible personalities. How can I use that to still make narrative storytelling? And this was my answer.
So well done. I also think the benefit for them, correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, but the benefit from them is there's a cross-promotion going on. So people that may not have had followers before are picking up followers. They must be expanding their own following by being in this.
Absolutely. I mean, for every influencer, it's different. I will say that there's a science. Like, there's no mistake that these 10 YouTubers are on screen. We wanted to have somebody who was from sort of the DIY hair fashion spot. We wanted to have a gamer. We wanted to have,
I know, but
all
your
these
brilliance
different
is in the
archetypes.
chemistry that you created in casting. So can you talk a little bit about that? You
Yeah,
know, you
absolutely.
chose them from different genres of what they represent, but how did you know they would mesh, click?
You know, we didn't, to be totally honest. They actually, I mean, some of them have met before, but like they've never been in an escape room before. So that's sort of the gamble that you take when you sign them up. And they, of course, don't know what's coming because they're reactors. But based on their past videos, we can kind of predict, like, okay, Liza's going to be the comedian. We can count on her to give us really funny one-liners.
So
you know.
basically that's their casting videos. You're casting from them.
Yeah, that's right. But to sort of bring it back, you know, it very much is, it's premeditated. We definitely think it out, for sure, yeah.
And I think also, too, to that, Catherine, is that Joey has also, too, he has his own sensibilities because he has to be both among them, you know, and he has to be on both sides. And I think that he also has, he wants to get people that he believes can play make-believe. And many of them, he walks in those circles. And so I think that's the component is, do we think they can play make-believe?
Are there any like fan gatherings around the country? Do you do any pop-up events? Do you do anything to promote the series?
Sure. So every year we premiere at VidCon, which is like the sort of convention of YouTube online video. And the gathering is crazy. We had an escape room this season that people were waiting, and we actually waited in line 3 hours just
You
to
actually
do
had
it.
an escape room at VidCon?
That's right. Yeah, and so then there's also like different activations to take photos, meet and greets. We have a party each year. Like it's a very big deal for the show and
they do, and plus Red does their own traditional marketing. I mean, there's 14 billboards in LA. There's TV. It plays before movies. They do the full package.
It's actually, I mean, from my standpoint, to just take the elements that you have taken and combine them into something that's winning, I mean, that's amazing. And you look at all of the traditional reality television production, I mean, kudos to you. One of the things that Bina Murray is great at doing is casting. And they know that the secret to any success is in the casting. And now you've got highly visible people that already have followings, and you're actually casting, you're not doing a casting call, you're trusting your gut. So
for sure. I think it's important to also note that we go after people who we think are going to be big the year ahead. So like
Wow.
Liza and DeStorm a year ago weren't as big as they are now, but they both just went home with streaming awards for like best comedian and such. So I think that's another piece to the puzzle to think about a year from now who's going
So you have to be a little bit
break.
intuitive about
That's
whether
right.
they've got it or
Yes,
not.
for sure.
Great. I want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions, especially those of you who are looking to create content for digital and YouTube Red. So I'm going to ask you to stand and shout if you would like. If not, I have a bunch more questions. So anyone have a question? Yes. What is the structure of deals with YouTube Red?
So for this one, I mean, I have to say that it's backwards. Our deal with Brian Grader Media and Joey and YouTube, it was a production services sort of deal. Now they are not that anymore. And so, you know, that's pretty much where we're at the moment.
If they're not that anymore, is it starting to take the shape of traditional television where you're a license fee and deficit financing and all the things that have come from the television world starting to institutionalize themselves inside of YouTube Red?
Absolutely. Yeah, so 2018 is going to be a really big year for YouTube because they're pushing AVOD, so ad-supported content. And you're going to see a lot more programming with celebrities and such. I think Demi Lovato has a thing coming out similar to what they did with Katy Perry. So yes, a lot more traditional sort of deals are happening now that they're established.
So you guys were kind of first out of the box, really. Out of those, you said there were 10 golden tickets?
For the most part.
And how many-
Don't quote me on 10, but it was a handful of golden tickets.
And how many of those, so really they were giving you the license to experiment more or less, yes?
That's right.
And so how many of those 10 have emerged like you guys have?
Well, PewDiePie was one of them.
Oops.
Which is no longer on. But I think Fight of the Living Dead was one. Ours, Foursome, which is continuing with Logan Paul. And
So-
so there's like 4 of us.
So inquiring minds want to know, will there be a season 3?
We are in negotiations.
I can't imagine there
official
not
breakup.
being because of the success of the show. Do you ever think, am I going to be doing this for, like, you know, sometimes if you're in television, you go, oh my God, I'm with a hit, now I'm going to be with this show for 9 years, there goes my life. So do you think in terms of doing something else, or you take that creativity and say, I'm taking this in a new direction because it gives me opportunities with each season to do something spectacular?
I think we're doing both things, right? So we're gonna. At first, Joey said, "Hey, Adam, maybe we'll do 3 seasons, maybe." And I said, "Okay, let's do that." And then he said, "No, actually, Adam, let's just run forever." And I said, "Okay, we'll do that." So I think
Vampires do live forever.
That's
so
right,
If he
that's
gets
right.
bitten, you're in.
So I think I love it. I love doing it. And I think this team that does it with me is, you know, these are not only my best friends, but my colleagues in war. That I think we would like to play it as long as we can because of all that we get to explore. But we also have other opportunities and other shows and other things we are also deep in the middle of as well. So this will just be one piece of our bigger picture that we get through every year. This one, takes a lot out of you, but it's worth the ride.
It is, it's interesting to me because there is a way, given your mind and given what I've watched, that it is continually refreshed. And it is continually, it doesn't get old. And even if you bring in new cast members and they're all going to react in different ways, and the way they react together is what makes it fresh. And so when you look at traditional reality, every year they have a new gimmick. Well, let's change this, so this happens, and this, let's change the show mechanics. But basically what you're doing is you're exploiting reaction by just laying out, different triggers.
Right,
So-
and for us, our only format element is, you didn't see it in this episode because this was a two-parter, but on the second back side of it, they vote. Because there's a final challenge at the end of every episode. They vote, 2 people go in, and there's some sort of either physical challenge, test, and then one of them gets killed at the end of it, who loses. So that's actually how...
One of the
YouTubers.
influencers.
So at the end of the season, there's only just a couple influencers left. So that's the ride.
I would get so pissed if I was one of the first influencers to get killed.
Yeah, they are. But that's
Can't they all live in hell together and still come back?
Yeah, well, see, that's kind of...
Discuss that.
Yes. And so I think that's our only format, and you're right, we don't have to just maybe change from island to island. We get to change eras, we get to change all of our monsters, we get to change everything about our show each season because they're traveling through time, and that's kind of our only format that we have to hang on to.
Excellent. Another question. Yes? What are your audience demographics, and are there any surprises?
Yeah, I don't think there's any surprises. No. There's zero surprises on the demographic side. I mean, our audience is, the vast majority of it lives between 13 and 25. No question about it. The front face of our audience is Joey Graceffa's audience, which is essentially 80% female skewing, 13 to 25. The show's skewing in overall is maybe not that female skewing, but that's just his audience. So that's our demo.
It's so easy for YouTube now in terms of advertising because they've got all your demographic information. They see the activity of the audience around it. They've got all of the length of time that people spend with the show and all that. So it's a no-brainer to marry advertisers to a hit in this case. Yeah. Next question. I can't see. Okay. Guys and gal, this was so great. Thank you for coming up to Vancouver to share. Sure. When do the episodes release generally, and how can people see this now?
So June 23rd is always the premiere date of the new season. You can get it on, episode 1 is AVOD on YouTube. Anyone can watch it. Then the episodes after that are behind the paywall on YouTube Red, or if you have YouTube TV, you can get them all there as well. That's just YouTube's broadcast channels. I think those are the places to get it.
Catherine and Adam, Ari, thank you so much for being here and sharing Escape the Night with us.